welcome you all. So tonight's topic is titled Beyond the Philosophy and the Legacy of Sinai. Because this week, in this parsha, this chapter that we read weekly, every one of the 52 weeks of the year has a corresponding chapter, the 52 chapters of the Torah. And each chapter, corresponding to the 7 days of the week, breaks into 7 sections. So, in effect, every day of the year has its section. So, this week we read the chapter called Yitro, the book of Exodus. And though there are many themes, but the highlight, one of the highlights, is the story and the historical event, the revelation at Sinai. And the Torah describes it in graphic detail. So if we are to say that as I said, each day of the week corresponds to another part of the chapter, so the Wednesday section begins that in the 3rd month from when the Jewish people left Egypt. They left, of course, in the month of Nisan when we celebrate Passover. So the 3rd month after Nisan would be Iyar, and then Sivan, the 3rd month. The biblical names for months are by number, not by name. So we call Nisan, the Torah calls the 1st month. Iyar is month 2, 2nd month. So the 3rd month, the first day of the 3rd month, they arrived at Sinai. And the continuing story is how they prepare themselves to the Sinai Revelation. So I thought it appropriate to address this theme, particularly because Sinai is unquestionably maybe the greatest event in history. And not just for Jews, but for the entire world, really. Besides the fact that all the major religions were spawned at Sinai, many of the fundamental principles of contemporary ethics and constitutional structures are built on the principles that were taught at Sinai, or delivered or formalized at Sinai. Beginning with the 10 Commandments, but it's not just the 10 Commandments, it's all the details and all the nuances that ultimately developed into a full body of Torah law. The Talmud, as I said, later became adapted and assimilated into many different systems. You'd be surprised how many actually secular legal structures today are built on the principles that were taught at Sinai. So it's always fascinating when an event has an effect, an impact, not just for that moment, but for thousands of years. It would be intriguing to know what exactly was the secret, what happened there that had that type of perpetual impact. And especially, how many events that happened thousands of years ago should impact us today. You know, most of those events, a long time ago, for good or for bad, they wear off. So though the teachings or wisdom or ideas are passed on, but events are usually not something that remain forever and ever part of the fabric of our universe. So initially, the argument would go that that the Sinai principles, or the Sinai Revelation, taught a profound philosophy which became the bedrock of civilization. And that lies his power, therein lies his power in his philosophy. So just as later Aristotle and other thinkers in their time developed certain philosophies that became enduring models, or enduring and perpetual ideas that shaped the rest of history, society must have been a most powerful and maybe the most powerful philosophy of all. But the truth is, as we'll see, it's much deeper than that and far beyond that as well. And I think to bring it back to the personal, the real question and challenge is, what really impacts us as human beings altogether in a way that has effect on us forever and ever? Now, we all are influenced and inundated, you can say, by many voices and forces that beckon for our attention. There are marketers, there are advertising, whether it's on television or internet or in books or wherever you turn, somebody is trying to get our attention. And there are things that leave an impact on us short term. So they get you to buy something, for instance. And there are things that leave an impact on us more long term, and there are things that leave an impact on us forever and ever. The question is, what really is the secret of these different impacts? So, to be comprehensive about it, obviously, we have to take into consideration also what age, what stage in one's life an experience happens to have a real impact on you. For instance, things that happen in our younger age remain indelible effects on us, indelible scars for good and for bad, that don't easily go away as we get older. Sometimes the analogy given for it is like think of yourself as a newborn child, as a warm ball of wax, with everything etched in this wax. As the wax will harden, will remain etched forever and ever in this wax. Or think of it as a little scar on a seed. When that seed grows into a tree, there won't be a little scar, it will be a very big nash, a very big opening. So, the fact is, children in their impressionable years, which means all of us when we were children, the experiences of our lives have much deeper impact than when we get older, and we, I guess, more hardened and have more defenses. Things don't have quite the same influence on us. So that's one side of impact and influence. But then there's another side, which is, as adults, what are the things that really leave a strong impact on us? And I mean either whether it's positive or negative. So there's an expression from the Rabbeinu Tam. He has a book called the Sefer HaYoshar. And it's cited by the Shalah and others. And it's a famous line, you may have heard of it. But that's where it originates from him, and I guess he bases it on Talmudic ideas. But the actual expression is from the Rabbeinu Tam, and it goes like this: Dvarim hayetzim min halev, nechnosim el halev. Words that come from the heart enter the heart. Implying that words that come from the mouth or from the brain enter one ear and go out the other. So if you want to reach somebody's heart, you have to speak from your heart. A heart responds to a heart. In the words of the verse in the book of Proverbs, Kamayim aponim leponim, kein lev ha'adam la'adam. Like a face is reflected in water, so too one heart is reflected in another. And what's the analogy? The analogy is that without any effort, just as when you look into water, it will always give you a mirror image of your face. Without exception. That's the rule. Because water has a natural ability to reflect things. So too with a heart. That when a heart speaks, another heart will feel it and reflect. Can we suggest from that when you don't reach somebody, you haven't spoken from your heart? You could say that. So then how do we explain, for instance, so often that we really care about somebody and we really are sensitive to them and we speak from our hearts to them and it doesn't get through? You know, I'm sure you have people that they just don't get it, so to speak, with a capital I, it. Right. Anybody has such colleagues? And you care and you try and they just are blocked. And there's no question that you really mean it. You're sincere. So how is that consistent with the statement that words from the heart enter the heart? So the ostensible answer that most of us will give, of course, is somewhat a little tinged with arrogance, is that it's not me, it's that person. In other words, I spoke from my heart, but their heart is blocked. And there's something that they're not able to hear it. But I learned from my teachers, and who learned it from theirs, that when it comes to communication, and you haven't gotten through to somebody, yes, it's easy to blame that person, and there may even be legitimate reasons for blaming that person, so to speak. I mean, I don't know, blaming, the legitimate causes that that person may not be able to hear it at the time. But a true communicator never, ever thinks in those terms. You always think whether you've reached deeper into your own heart, and if you haven't reached, maybe you haven't really spoken from your heart in the fullest sense of the word. So that doesn't take the other person off the hook. But it's not about focusing on others, it's about focusing on yourself. If you really care about somebody, you're not looking for a scapegoat who to blame and say, oh, I feel so great because I was able to speak and that person's not able to listen. And this is a statement in the Zohar that says the following. Oy, the Zohar says. Oy is an expression in Hebrew also. Woe. On a person, the Odnin, the Loy Shaman. On ears that cannot hear. And the Zohar, in the same similar state in the Talmud, that someone's words are not heard, it means that the person who's speaking doesn't have fear of heaven, Yirah Shamayim. That's what the Zohar says and the Talmud says. In other words, if a person speaks with sincerity and ideas and shares, and they're not being heard by another, the Torah basically says it's not the listener but the speaker that's lacking Yirah Shamayim, that's lacking. Yirah Shamayim literally means fear of heaven, or you could say awe of heaven. It means a person lacking the humility of standing before God. Which is pretty harsh, because you could say, one second, what, you always blame it on the person who's speaking? What about the listener? Maybe the listener is doing something wrong. But yes, when it comes to communication, and Moses, who was the ultimate communicator, when he didn't get through to the people, he ultimately looked inside his own heart and soul, what is it that I'm not saying right? So as I said, it's true that the listener also has sometimes obligation, and that's what the listener has to work on. But the communicator's job is not to focus on what the listener has to change, but to focus on what he or she, the communicator, has to change. Because if you're a truly humble communicator of truth and ideas, and the truth is not penetrating, you always say to yourself, what have I not said? Maybe I haven't said it right. Maybe that person needs different words. So if everybody had that type of security, being secure enough to look at yourself instead of always blaming others, we'd have a better world, wouldn't we? Because one of the biggest problems, of course, is whenever there are conflicts, we always look at the other person and blame them. Again, I'm not suggesting there isn't blame to go around, but in relationships, if you're a giving person and you're a loving person and a responsible person, you always look at yourself with a stronger, harsher eye. Say, what could I have done better? It's a sign of humility. Obviously, I have to add a disclaimer. Does that mean that you have to become a doormat if the other person is mistreating you and you're just constantly looking at yourself? No, absolutely not, because I'm not discussing someone who's annihilating their own feelings. I'm talking about someone who has the strength to say, how can I communicate better? That doesn't mean you have to tolerate abuse or tolerate another person's issues. But when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, you definitely look at yourself because you have the strength of character of looking how to communicate it better. And this is both in writing and in teaching and in speaking. And I know it may sound even counterintuitive. You think the teacher, who's maybe the one that's more of a scholar, more brilliant, should be the one that should be, the students should be trying to lift themselves up to the teacher's level, not the teacher's going down to the student's level. So that's true, students should be doing that. But from the teacher's point of view, he or she, to really reach, has to learn to cater, and you could say customize, tailor the ideas to the right students, each in their own way. Which is why true communication is never about some type of generalities and general formulas. It's about understanding the unique case-by-case situation. There are no two people that are alike. And even when two people voice the same question, it's not the same question. It may be the same words, it may be the same idea. And there may even be a general answer that can be given to both of them. But if you're really sensitive to the human condition and to the person that you're talking to, the question is coming from them right now, right here, in their situation, and they're a different human being going through different experiences, and someone else who may have the same question in different circumstances. So the real wisdom and sensitivity here is not just having an encyclopedic list of answers to the most common asked questions, but it's also taking that list and customizing it uniquely to a person's situation. And this also includes another piece of critical advice in regard to communication. You'll see the connection to Sinai soon. It's not unrelated. I'm not on a tangent here. And that is to know also when to be silent. I would say there's expression siyag l'chachma shtika in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers. What does siyag l'chachma shtika mean? So usually people interpreted that it's a sign of wisdom to know when to be silent. But the truth is the word siyag in Hebrew means actually like a support or a fence even. It's a way of amplifying wisdom. So if you interpret it that way, siyag l'chachma shtika, you'd say silence actually makes a person wiser. So in that sense, you can broaden the idea that it's not just about speaking, it's also knowing when to listen. Not just about silence, knowing when to listen, when to speak. But it also includes knowing what to say and what not to say. There was a professor, Green, his name was, Melville Green, who was in Minnesota, St. Paul, Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And he was a macrobiologist. He is still around. He's in Israel now. He's a macrobiologist, I believe. And a true scientist, rational, logical. And there's a rabbi feller who's a rabbi in that part of the world. Went to see him. This goes back to early 60s. That's the 1960s. We're already in the year 2000, not 1860s. Time is flying. And he went to see him. And they began a relationship. And they would have these debates, and he would give his scientific debates, and the rabbi would always try to convince him to do this mitzvah, that mitzvah. And they got into the whole discussion of evolution and the age of the universe and the Torah's view. And the rabbi, as a rabbi, gave him different books or articles to read on the topic. And at the point, he gave him an article from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about this subject. And the professor came back to him and said, "Look, I read the letter, but that's a letter for lay people. For a professor or a scholar, academic like myself, it's not an adequate explanation." So he suggested, "Why don't you write a letter to the Rebbe himself? Tell him that." So he did, with all his rebuttals and his arguments. And he didn't receive a response, not 1 day, not 2 days, not 1 year, not 2 years. And he always said to himself, okay, I guess the rabbi didn't have an answer. So he just didn't respond. A few years later, he went to visit New York, and he went to have a private audience with the Rebbe. And at that point, he had become more observant, Shomer Shabbos. At the end of the conversation, of their meeting, so the Rebbe said to him, regarding the letter you wrote to me a few years ago, about the evolution, the age of the universe, I'd like to share some thoughts on this. And he went into, and I heard the story directly from the Professor Green. He went into a lengthy academic discussion, which was more than adequate, the professor told me. It was very profound and fully answered all his questions. So he said to the Rebbe, I appreciate the answer, but tell me, why didn't you answer me at the time? It would have resolved a lot of issues for me, because I really thought that you had no answer. And you just avoided by simply never responding. And I see now you have this brilliant answer. I'm sure you didn't develop at this moment. So why didn't you just answer me at the time? And the Rebbe said to him, did it make a difference? Look, you're still here now. You become more observant. It didn't change the equation. He says, no, but I had a lot of aggravation over the issue, and I always struggled with it. And the Rebbe responded, he said to him like this, I sensed from your letter back then that had I answered it, I may have won a debate, but would have lost a Jew. What he meant by not lost a Jew in the literal sense, but it basically meant you win the battle, lose the war. I would have won the debate, I may have answered the question, I sensed, I guess what I'm saying was, I sensed the ego and the pride, and you probably would have gotten into a debate with me, and it would have been back and forth, back and forth. And he was so impressed by this, because it wasn't just the answer, it was the timing of when to give the answer. You know, sometimes if you're an intelligent person, someone comes to you with a challenging question, you feel appropriate to answer. And if you don't answer, in a sense it's irresponsible, because you're leaving the person think there's no answer. Like, here's a scholar, here's a respected rabbi or teacher, and they can't answer the question. So it takes a real strength of character and personality and wisdom to understand that despite the fact that that person may go away thinking there's no answer, or at least at this time, it's wiser sometimes to silence than to speak. Because there's some things we have to learn on our own, or we have to be ready to hear, and the time comes when you're ready to hear it. Obviously, it requires a lot of discretion and intelligence to know when, because this isn't a rule either. When do you speak? When don't you speak? But this comes down to the sensitivity, as I said, of words coming from the heart, entering the heart. That you're not just philosophizing, but you're actually working on really understanding, connecting to another person's soul. That's what communication is. So it's far beyond logic. If they need logic, and you're sensitive to their soul, and their soul right now needs a logical response, that's what you'll provide. But if they need an emotional response, or they may not even need words, they just need space or time, you're also sensitive to that, because you're not just dealing with a mind and a mind. It's not about two minds debating an issue. Which is why I always, whenever I'm invited to debates, I always reject the invitations. Not because I'm afraid of debates. I've debated in my life. I'm not afraid of that. Because I never feel there's real benefit. It's usually entertainment for the audience. They see two guys bashing it out. And the truth is, when it comes to true subtle subjects, a debate does not create more clarity, because the audience doesn't get to learn anything. They get to learn two conflicting opinions. And it's not necessarily words from the heart. And what do you do when you're sitting with somebody and you fundamentally disagree with them? And you want to be sensitive, but you also don't want to give people an impression that you agree. What do? So you either have to bash the guy, which is very insensitive in a way, to make your point, or you have to not, and then people get the impression that you agree. So I'm not dismissing the entertainment value of debates, and there are times and situations, like in the Talmudic style, where people debate, they argue. But there you're talking about mature, intelligent people communicating, and they're trying to crystallize the ideas, so debate works very well. It's argument, counter-argument, trying to glean or derive the essence of an idea. That case, yes. Because then you're talking about two equals, not necessarily an audience. You're not talking about trying to communicate to people. You're trying about developing, it's like a brainstorm session. Would you have a brainstorm session in front of beginner students? Yeah, maybe to teach them what brainstorming is like. But they get all confused. They won't understand why, a brainstorm session is everything is open. Everything's out of the box. When you're communicating and teaching, you have to think of the person you're communicating to. And there, requires much more sensitivity, and not just entertainment, and not just to get their attention. So it's all about, I would say, an integrated form of communication. And it is an art. It is an art to communicate. It's not just, so some people may come a little more natural than to others, but even for them, it's still an art. It's like music. They're natural musicians, but they're still an art. They still need to develop and work on, and continuously work on, how to refine their communication skills. And it's much more than what you say. It's actually more what you don't say than what you do say. Just like it is on a piece of paper. When you look at a piece of paper, the beauty of the book, which is going through its own trauma today with digital versions. But the beauty of a book, when they first set type on a book, it looks simple to us. But you know, the white space is more important than the black space of the letters. There's more white space on a page than the black space, so that actually occupy the letters. Because should you not have the white, you wouldn't be able to read properly. So we take it for granted because today we just see pages upon pages. But when they first established printing, and they first printed words on pages, it was a whole struggle of figuring out the balance between white space, black space, between what is said, so to speak, and what is the space in between what is said. And we're not even getting into the between the lines and so on and so forth. So I say all of this, I was speaking on a personal level because talk about what has impact on us and what doesn't have impact. In direct proportion to how deep you reach into a person's heart and soul will be the impact it has on them. So yes, we may be influenced very strongly by advertising. It shapes the way we shop, what we buy, what we eat, how we dress. I mean, thousands and thousands of things. How much is half a minute in the Super Bowl advertisement these days? 3 million? What is it up to? What's it up to? Who's the expert in this field? Okay, does anybody know what a Super Bowl is? Okay, that's great. Your grandfathers didn't know what it was either, so don't feel so bad. And they managed quite well. And at Sinai, it didn't even exist yet. So there were some things that preceded the Super Bowl. Yeah. So there are advertisements, there are things that, as I said, inundate us, but they come and go. They get your attention for a moment. Yeah, they may make you go deep, reach into your pocket and pay and buy something. Spontaneous, quick, but it doesn't last very long. And the things that are most everlasting are the things that reach deepest in the heart and soul. And I should say, just to make sure that it's complete and thorough, this doesn't only mean positive things. The reason that emotional, and I don't even want to mention sexual, but other forms of abuse affect us so deeply because they reach into your heart and soul. You get a cut, God forbid, on your finger, so it's not a pleasant thing, but it's just a superficial cut and it will heal. If someone goes into your heart and soul and hurts you there, it's a different type of hurt. It's in your vulnerable place. It's in your most tender and sensitive area. So both positive and negative, the direct proportion of how deeply it reaches within us is how long it will last. But we also have resilience on the good end of things, which means even if we are hurt, God created us with the ability to heal. On the other hand, positive things that impact us in our heart and soul, that's not something you want to heal from. That's something you actually want to keep. So the point is that when we talk about things that have everlasting or perpetual impact, you have to look at what type of experience the initial experience was like. So I want to go back now to Sinai and talk about its true power and why, when you understand it, it is relevant today more than ever. Despite the thousands of years that passed since the Jews stood at that mountain in the Sinai wilderness 3,322 years ago. I'll begin with, we'll do a study in contrast, comparative quotes. One is from Bertrand Russell, and one is from Maimonides. I always like this type of juxtaposition. I know you wouldn't usually fit them in together. The Rambam and Bertrand Russell. I don't think they knew each other, but I got to know both of them, at least through their writings. So Bertrand Russell said once, and he was a philosopher and ethicist, and he did something immoral. I don't know what it was. And he was asked by some of his colleagues or students, you teach ethics at Cambridge, and you write about ethics, and how can you behave so inconsistent with your own teaching? Not that he's the first, but that's the question I was asking him. So he said, look, I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. It's a brilliant answer. It means you don't have to be what you teach. You teach ideas, but not necessarily you. Abstract ideas, tangible ideas. Compare this now to Maimonides, Rambam, in Hilchos Deis, in his laws of, I guess, behavior or knowledge, however you want to define Deis. Maimonides, Rambam writes in the beginning of chapter 5 like this. What is it, 4 or 5? He writes, thank you. If you want to know the criteria for a Talmid Chacham, for a wise person, how can you tell? What are the signs? So he doesn't say this, but I'll just process from what he says. You'll understand. He says it's not from the person's oratory skills, or brilliance, or knowledge, or years of education. It's not what he says, but that you can see from an implication. How can you tell who the wise person is? From the simple things that he or she does. How he eats, drinks, sleeps, deals in business, speaks to people. The mundane, simple acts in a person's life. That's how you know where wisdom is truly expressed. So this is direct contradiction to what Russell wrote or said, that you can teach about things and not be it. From Maimonides' point of view, if you teach it, you have to live it. That doesn't mean you have to live up to or be perfect. No one is as good as their teachings are. At least, I think so, right? That's a pretty solid statement. But to make it into turn it into a rule or turn it into a justification is another story. Well, what's the real difference between these two approaches? So in one word, it's integration or unity. If you see wisdom and knowledge as philosophical, as ideas, let's start with abstract ideas, and life is down here and ideas here, so these two don't necessarily come together. You can teach and learn and be a master in ideas, and you don't have to live up to any of them. It's not even necessary. That would be called a compartmentalized type of approach to education, which is essentially really the prevalent model that we work with in our day and age. But on the other hand, if knowledge is part of a larger reality, it's not just ideas and then behavior, but there's some type of integral unity that connects it all, then you can't compartmentalize and say, oh, here are the ideas and here's how people are. You are what you, not just what you know, what you teach, but also what you do. They say you are what you eat, but you are what you do, you are what you behave. And that's equally reflective of who you are than your ideas. Now, academics like to, especially in the last few hundred years, almost deify the concept of being detached, objective observers of phenomena. It's like you, the observer, the scholar, is looking and observing a reality outside of yourself and analyzing it and giving us your brilliant take on it. And you yourself are detached. Scientists will say they're amoral. They're not here to define moral, to conclude moral, or make moral choices and decisions. Just here to give you the objective ideas. So therefore, how I behave or don't behave, whether I behave morally or ethically, is irrelevant to the discussion of the ideas that I'm sharing with you. According to Maimonides, however, there's an integral unity between things. And yes, if you behave inconsistent with your teachings, and it becomes a consistent thing that you're inconsistent, let's put it that way, then there's a fundamental flaw even in your teachings. That doesn't mean you make mistakes necessarily, but it means there's something that is lacking a full integration. And let's go back now to impact. If someone were to give you were in a seminar about real estate taxes, or about how to cook, or other different classes or courses we go to, doesn't really affect you much if the teacher is arrogant. As long as you're getting what you paid for, you're getting the ideas, you go away with the knowledge, okay, you don't have to like the teacher. If they communicated ideas well, that's all you care about. But if they're communicating to you about morality and ethics and spirituality and purpose in life, and you sense and smell that that person is egoistic and arrogant, then it's not just a little footnote. The whole ideas become contaminated and tainted because you feel like the person's talking from their head, not from their heart. Going back to words from the heart and to the heart. We're not always right about this, but our heart is very wise in a way. You know when someone is sincere. You can know when someone is sincere. She'd say, why is sincerity so important? Why? I just want to hear what the person has to say, the facts. Because when it comes to real communication, integration is as equally important as the brilliance of the ideas. So Bertrand Russell was talking about an ethical idea, and the Rambam was. And they both had these two different philosophies that I don't have to be the triangle. And the Maimonides is saying that you see a wisdom in how you behave and how you talk and eat. Basically, you have two people talking ethics. And one eats and sleeps and deals in business and talks to people in very, very obnoxious ways. And the other is refined in their behavior. Obviously, their teachings are going to be received in different ways. As I said earlier, if you talk about superficial things, we can hear that because it doesn't go into our heart and soul. But when you talk about things that touch the heart and soul, their integrity. And integrity is very much connected to unity. And cohesiveness and seamlessness is critical. This doesn't mean that a teacher or a communicator has to be perfect. Not at all what it means. It's no one that's perfect. But a communicator has to be humble. And humility includes that I share with you ideas that I myself have not lived up to. And I acknowledge it. And I'm not going to justify saying, hey, I'm not the triangle, so it's cool. You'll say, we have to be the triangle. If I teach you about ethics, I have to be ethical. And if I'm not, I am flawed. We're all in the same boat, and we all struggle. That's the honest communicator speaking about the subject. And that resonates a lot differently than when you sometimes hear a teacher and you almost think like the teacher really thinks he's there. And almost condescending, pontificating about certain ideas. So it's about that type of internal sensitivity that creates, as I said, the integrity and consistency from the idea to the actions. Why Sinai had such a major impact on history was because of this best kept secret. It wasn't just the ideas that were conveyed at the time, and the philosophies, and the brilliance of principles, and commandments, the simplicity of them, at the same time the profundity. It was because they experienced in an integrated fashion. And that changes everything. When you hear it, and it touches your heart and soul, because you feel a deeper unity communicating, it's a whole different experience than when you just hear deep wisdom. And that's why when you say something beyond philosophy, in Judaism and in Torah, interestingly, everything is integrated. Now that doesn't mean you can study everything all the time, but the idea, for example, which we find in secular academics, is there are courses. There are physical sciences, there are social sciences, there are political sciences. And you can go to, there are courses in mathematics and courses in science and logic and literature, in history, mathematics. I mean, the list goes on. Different categories. And that is, in one way, very organized. Because everything belongs in its own particular area. And when you're studying math, you're not studying psychology. But there's also a fundamental flaw that has become part of our academic way of thinking, is that knowledge is compartmentalized. In Torah, the exact opposite is emphasized. And that's what happened at Sinai. That though knowledge has different rules, obviously studying physics has different guidelines than when you study medicine, but there's a place where they all meet. and there's an integration where they all meet. And in that sense, really, there is no such distinction between one wisdom and the next. They have fundamental unifying principles that connect them all. So what we call, let's say, philosophy and psychology, in Judaism, these are considered to be one. Which means every philosophical idea has to have a psychological application. And every psychological application is rooted in some philosophical idea. There's no such thing as a philosophy that's abstract and detached from reality. And everything has consequences. If you want to see how extreme and cruel lack of integration can become, all you need is a study, and I don't like to use this example, but it's just the best one that really blatantly points it out in undeniable fashion. All you need is a study of Nazi Germany. A culture that nobody considered a third world, dismissed it as some type of barbaric, third world primitive culture. Germany, considered to be the highest of the high in literature, in music, in art, and undeniably so. No one argues with that. And suddenly, or maybe it's not so suddenly, maybe it was rooted earlier, but regardless, able to turn all their science and all their wisdom into this efficient killing machine, beyond killing in maybe the worst possible way in history, more than any barbarian ever murdered. And at the same time, literally, we're able to have these type of most sensitive laws regarding dogs and cats and pets. And you want compartmentalization. So it's one thing, a person is an insensitive human being. They're insensitive across the board to everybody. But to be able to dehumanize some people, treat them worse than animals, and then go at night to an opera without any concern is, as I said, this is the most grotesque manifestation of compartmentalization. In a strange way, it's rooted in Bertrand Russell's I'm Not the Triangle. Now, I'm not blaming him for the Nazi Germany. But everything begins in a subtle place. You make a little split, and then the split widens, and it turns into the worst possible thing. Ideologically, the split doesn't have to manifest itself in the worst type of behavior for it to be a split. Sometimes it's a very subtle thing. So the most important effect and impact of Sinai and the people that were there was integration. What you learn here and what you hear and what you see today at Sinai is meant to be an integrated experience in all of your life forever and ever. You will always have a struggle. You'll always have challenges. Because we are human beings. We have a Yetzer Hara. We have inclinations and temptations and selfishness and narcissism that we always have to contend with. But know that if you're looking for truth, don't ever justify compartmentalization. It's consistency. It's seamlessness. And this resonates in all of us. Going back to children, look at children. For them, everything is seamless. It's only as we get into sophisticated adults that we create the world of duality, or even better, duplicity. Because then we compartmentalize. This is here, this is there. Hashem Echad is the single most powerful liturgy, prayer in Judaism. Shema. Listen. And listen. And the last word is Echad, that it's all one. All integrated. Compartmentalization is an enemy. So yes, that doesn't mean, of course, you have in your home, you have shelves, and you have rooms, and you have different places you categorize. You don't put it all on one shelf, hopefully. But it's still one home. It's not 1,000 homes. Or look at our bodies, if you want the ultimate example of harmony within diversity. The body, with 75 trillion cells, and billions of different types of molecules racing through all the different diverse organs, Yet you're one human being. There's one you. God forbid, it's a terrible disease if the organs begin to fight with each other, or the immune system begins to reject itself. One of the worst possible diseases. So there's a cohesiveness. You think to yourself for a moment, who's the captain of the ship inside of you? Who's telling you when you walk down the street that your left leg and right leg shouldn't slip against each other? And who's telling your windpipe to close when your food pipe is open? And I'm just using two little stupid examples. Millions and millions of decisions and millions of interactions are happening right now as we speak. Every time you breathe in and breathe out. It's not just a breath. The whole system is going into a whole type of coordination. So as diverse as it is, without any effort, there's some conductor that's taking all these different instruments within us and bringing it together, one human being, one cohesive human being. I'm talking about the physical level. We talk about psychologically, on the other hand, we're just a bundle, a jumble of all kinds of voices, and we wish it would be as cohesive as that. You have a struggle between your mind and your heart, between your instant gratification and short-term needs and long-term needs, between your personal issues and your work. I mean, we are full of conflicts and full of contradictions when you're talking about the emotional, psychological part of a human being. On the physical end, on the other hand, it's like one cohesive unit. Well, Sinai, for a moment, created a unity even on the psychological and emotional level. So, imagine yourself, and everybody has had moments like this. There are times in your life, they don't happen often, but I'm sure you can remember some magical moments, where even on the psychological, emotional level, you also felt a certain cohesiveness. Sometimes it happens when we're amongst nature, going out on vacation and swimming in the water. You could be floating underwater and you sense it. It doesn't usually last, because as soon as you start thinking about your relationships, that type of manucha, as they say, peace of mind goes away. But there are moments where we, I guess, escape, if you wish, or whatever you want to call it, a certain taste of a peaceful seamlessness. And we wish we could hold on to it. But then we have to hit back, we hit the pavement, we hit reality again. But what I'm here to tell you is that we can create it, not just moments, if you're able to reach in your own soul a place that transcends these divisions and these compartments. So the first and foremost thing to know is that you are fundamentally not a compartmentalized human being. You're fundamentally one cohesive unit. Not just your body, but your soul, and your spirit, and your psyche. And then it became splintered. And when it became splintered, that's where we have all our conflicts. Sinai taught the people that you can reconnect once again and repair the splinters and find that cohesiveness. So the Sinai experience was not just about laws and wisdoms and philosophies. I am your God, the Ten Commandments, do not create idols, honor your parents, do not steal. That was the technical information. But it was a full-bodied and a full sensory experience. If you read this week's chapter, you'll see. It was like a real firework display. There was thunder, and there was lightning, and there were colors, and it was a real experience. And an interesting thing that happened, which I discussed previous years, I won't go into detail, but you've ever heard of synesthesia? Oh? Okay. Well, so I'm going to teach you a new phenomenon. It's called synesthesia. You can look it up on Google tonight if you like. Synesthesia is actually a true condition. It's a human condition that some people say it's an affliction, and some people say it's a gift. You can decide on your own. But there were artists like Kandinsky and others that had it, and people have it today. What is synesthesia? And this is not some. I'm not off the wall here, but this is really been demonstrated, and there are people who have this. Synesthesia are people, individual, when they hear a sound, they see a color, and when they see colors, they hear sounds. Yeah. It's some type of, I guess, cross-wiring between the sound and sight in our brain. And if you think about it, it's not so inconceivable. We see things, we see colors, we see shapes, we see things, and we hear sounds. So people like this, they actually, when they see different colors, they actually hear different sounds. Now in physics or medicine, it's explained because it's all about airwaves, so there's sound waves and there are light waves. And if the brain, some type of circuit is missing or something like that, they can, as I said, they can cross over. And the interesting thing is the people who have this actually hear the same sound, so it's not like some type of fantasy. They're like certain sounds have the color blue, and certain colors have certain sounds. You can check it out. In this week's chapter, synesthesia is a reality. It says that Shemenes Hanira v'Reyenes HaKelis, the Jews, when they heard the sounds, they saw the sounds, and they heard the sights. Shemenes Hanira v'Reyenes HaKelis in Hebrew. There was a crossover where suddenly the senses all experienced something. The sight experienced sound, and the sound experienced sight. So in a normal, so-called sane world, these two usually are separate, compartmentalized. You could have a multi-sensory experience, like a light and sound show. So it's coordinated, the lights and the sounds. But that doesn't mean the lights have sound and the sounds have lights. But there was an experience when a person gets deeper into the soul, where actually things begin to melt, the boundaries begin to melt down, and there is an integrated type of experience. There was, what was his name? He passed away, he died last year. He was a chemist working in Switzerland, one of the pharmaceutical companies, the 50s. What's his name? Well, he was the founder of, he basically discovered what was called LSD. Maybe, I'm not sure. I wrote about it, it'll come to me in a moment. Anyway, he began his research actually, searching for a drug, being that he was into psychological and psychiatric studies. He was searching for a drug to induce madness. I know, we don't need a drug. It's easy to induce without a drug. But he was looking for some medication to induce madness, to see if he could have put himself in the shoes of some of the patients he was seeing. Professors do interesting things. So he experimented. Albert Hofmann. There you go. Right. Albert Hofmann. Rabbi Google, right? As the rabbi. So he couldn't experiment on anybody, so he had to experiment on himself, and which he did. With all the risks involved, because he never knew what could happen. He may induce it and never return. So he had, when he experimented, he had with him notebooks and notepads and cameras and tape recorders, just in case something happened, it should all be documented. So he writes in his own diary that what happened was that he was experimenting with some concoction of some of these chemicals. He ingested it, and then he was driving home on a bicycle to lunch. And in the middle, while he was on the bicycle, he writes that he was driving through this beautiful field of trees, shrubs, like hedges, and there was like a long road to his home. It's like a long road, and suddenly, as he's on the bicycle, he starts seeing that the bushes are starting to vibrate. And then after they begin vibrating, he starts seeing colors, taking shapes and forms. And then the bushes, the hedges seem to rise from the ground, and suddenly he felt like his bicycle was soaring into heaven. He's writing all this and documenting it. He documented it later. And it came to a point where everything started melting into one. There was no longer him, and no longer the bicycle, and no longer the bushes and the road. And he felt he was going mad. He was like losing it. But some miraculous way he made his way home. And immediately turned on the tape recorder and began to speak. I don't know if he passed out and then came to, but he didn't know whether what's going to happen. And then later, when it wore off, that was his first, the first historical acid trip. Okay, and he documented it all, and to him it was like it was a certain form of madness. And he came up with his theory, which I read years ago, and what blew my mind was not his theory, was that he came to a theory that is stated specifically in Kabbalistic literature, almost 1,000 years old, almost 2,000 years old, in the Zohar, and other Kabbalistic works. Literally. You'll see in a moment. And that is, his theory was that usually we diagnose madness as being insane or madness. However, today they don't use that word. It's chemical imbalances. Everyone has there's different versions and different variations and manifestations. But to him it was about, we usually identify it as something like the mind in its natural, healthy way functions, that it sees things in compartments. And madness is a sense of like somebody losing touch with reality. And his theory was the other way around, that perhaps madness is closer to truth than sanity is. Because sanity requires compartmentalized thinking. So take, for example, paranoia. The reason a healthy person is not categorized as paranoid is because when something negative happens in our lives, so at the moment we could be traumatized and shaken, and in deep ways, but then time passes, and whether it's the chemicals in your brain or whatever it is, it compartmentalizes. It files away that experience. It doesn't mean you ever forget it, but it doesn't have quite the same intense effect on you. So in a sense, sanity is really a form of limited awareness, because you're not remembering everything. Imagine you would remember, God forbid, every trauma that ever happened in your life as if it just happened. We wouldn't be able to survive. We wouldn't be able to go on with our lives. So in a sense, the mind, what it does is, it weakens the effect, and we lose, our memory fades. Whereas someone, for instance, take away those compartments, what happens? Everything starts flowing. Imagine you had ideas flowing in your mind so fast, you couldn't stop them. That would create a sense of madness. The fact that ideas come in spurts, meaning in limited ways, is actually what creates sanity. So who's actually more connected to the source of knowledge? Is it the insane person or the sane person? Sanity is basically blindness. I don't know if he uses those words. But what was I said so uncannily similar is what the Kabbalah says, and based on the Zohar and the Arizal, Isaac Lurie elaborates on it. It speaks about collective intelligence in the context of like what's called a koyach hamaskil, or moiches tima, for those of you familiar with these ideas. It's called the hidden mind, the concealed mind. And the concealed mind is like a state of unconsciousness, basically. Now, no one has ever seen the unconscious, that's why it's unconscious. How's that for logic? So, it's a state of reality as well. And the way we understand consciousness is like, think of it like this. Think of it like a reservoir of water. And that water is pumped into pipes, main pipes. Those pipes turn into smaller pipes, and then those pipes enter into your home, and finally reach your sink, and you turn on a faucet, and water comes out of the faucet. What's happening? The faucet is actually controlling the flow, because if it didn't, it would just come flooding out. That's what's called a leak. Or it's not a leak, or it's a flood. So the idea is to control the flow. So if you think of the collective intelligence, the conscious, as a big body of reservoir of water and ideas, the sane and conscious mind is like a faucet, like a filter, that is narrowing the flow and limiting it from overwhelming you. That's why ideas and wisdom is called chachma. It's called like sparks. They just drop in. Where do they come from? Where do ideas come from? But if you feel it, it sounds like a spark. It's almost like a little drop that comes from some bigger place. You don't know the bigger place, but you see the drop suddenly drop. Yeah, so some people think ideas come from the shower head. Some people have ideas in the shower. It's not from the shower head. It's from this collective place, and the faucet is what controls it. So think of this. There's a very thin line between genius and madness. A person who's a genius essentially has a faucet that's almost broken. So it's not quite so they don't go mad, but they're very close to that type of connected intelligence, integrated intelligence as it exists in the reservoir. Whereas people who have less brilliance, you'd say, have a much tighter flow, so the ideas come down much more condensed and much more limited fashion. Which is a fascinating way of looking at the universe, because then essentially our compartmentalization, though it keeps us sane and normal, it also is a form of blindness, as I said. It's a form of limitation. At Sinai, and this is the synesthetic experience, there was a moment of truth where all your senses, and all people's senses became unified. And that's a very rare thing. It's hard to contain and live that way, but when you do experience it, it's as the realest thing you'll ever experience. There are examples I could find in our own lives that we experience it. It could be a moment of very profound love, where all the troubles go away. In that moment, everything seems to make sense, everything seems to fit and belong. As I said earlier, it doesn't last always. It doesn't usually last because you have to get back to your so-called compartmentalized life. But we have moments when that happens. Sometimes it's with music, it's with art. I mean, I'm sure you can find examples. But we shouldn't see those examples as anomalies. That's actually the natural state of your life. When you were 9 months in your mother's womb, you were submerged in water. It was completely seamless. That's how we begin our lives, and that's what we always gravitate to. You can almost say that human anxiety is the search for that seamlessness that seems so elusive. That's so profound, but it seems so impossible to connect with. And therefore, Sinai in that sense was not just as I said, an intellectual experience. It was a full-bodied, a full spirit soul experience. So what's relevant to get back to us today, as I said before with Bertrand Russell and Maimonides, it's about starting to, I guess, taking our compartmentalized lives and beginning to decompartmentalize a bit. To start finding more unifying forces. Because if you were to divide your day, you'd see that you're made up of many, many fragments, one disconnected from the next. And these have to wear down our integrated soul. So a big part of life's, a big part of finding deeper, I guess, a deeper peace is through finding integration. You may think it's not a big thing that we have all these fragments, but as I said, it accumulates, and it does wear down a human being, that we have so many different forces tugging at us in all these different directions. The Sinai experience, though it happened 3,322 years ago, is really a perpetual experience that we can recreate every moment of our lives. So when you read the story, you read that God came down on Mount Sinai and Moses went up. So remember I mentioned before communication, a relationship. A communication and a relationship is one where you look deeper inside yourself, not the other, of what you can do to speak from the heart. When Moses met God and God met Moses at Sinai, what it really means in mystical and in a spiritual and psychological level, it means it's where the divine meets the mundane. It's where heaven kisses earth. So it's where soul meets body, where spirit meets matter. That's the place where we find the integration I'm describing. Because in the material world, matter by definition is divisive. It is inherent in the material world, physical world, that things are separate. A table is not a chair is not a bird is not a watermelon. I don't know why I said watermelon, but that's what came to mind. free association. And one thing is not the next. If you want to give me your seat, you have to get up from your seat and I can sit in it. Two physical objects cannot occupy the exact same space. Same thing with time and space. But on a soul level, you could say materialism divides, spirituality unites. On a soul level, you and I can be sitting in two different seats, but connect on a soul level as if we're one. Because soul does not occupy space, so therefore transcends time and space, and when you touch that place, it doesn't matter. You can be 1,000,000 miles away from somebody and feel like one with them. You could sit right near someone and feel as distant as possible. You know, we sit in stadiums, we go to shows, and you can sit with 10,000, 50,000, 60,000 people all cheering, but it's an illusion because everybody goes home and it's as separate and strange as they are before they came in. So soul connections transcend time and space. So what happens when these two, how do these two become integrated? That's the Sinai experience. The Medrash says that before Sinai, there was a fundamental schism, split, between that which was above and that which is below. Or to use these terms, between matter and spirit. And at Sinai, the power was given of integration, fusion. One word, fusion. The fusion of spirit and matter. It would take thousands of years for Einstein, whose grandparents stood at Sinai, to develop the equation E equals mc squared, that energy and matter are reversible. And that all matter is really energy. But the principle of it was established at Sinai. That matter can be converted into energy, and energy exists within all of matter. That there is no two compartments in this world, they're all one. It's one unified whole. But it's in our limited perception that we see pieces and fragments. And it's our mission, if you wish, is to unite a fragmented life. The fragments manifest in our lives. As I said, we have our struggles between mind and heart, between what we ideologically believe in and what reality, so-called, of business force us to do. Idealism, practicality things. I mean, the list goes on. We have our fears. Fear is one of the worst forces that fracture us. What does fear do? It terrifies you of things. That's immediately separates you. A person who feels integrated and connected is not afraid of anything because he feels connected to everything. A fearful person retreats and fears, I'm not you, you're not me. Not just with people, but with experiences. So we have plenty of forces inside of us that are constantly splitting us apart from each other and from ourselves. Sinai offers us all an opportunity to integrate. So how do you do it practically? So what happens when God and Moses meet? What happens when heaven and earth kiss? What happens is there's a fusion. And that fusion can be recreated. It's recreated in our own actions. Going back to what Maimonides said, that an idea, when it comes into action, is a reflection that the idea has a truth to it. When Bertrand Russell said, as I mentioned before, that I teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle, so I can teach ethics and I don't have to be ethical. The fundamental problem with that is it's an endorsement of compartmentalization. When Maimonides says that a wise person is recognized in how he eats and sleeps and drinks, and sleeps and does daily activities, business and so on, the mundane matters, is a endorsement and a necessity for integration. That ideas and your wisdom, he's not saying there isn't wisdom for people who don't act on it, but it's not, you can't call it that you have a criteria. The test of wisdom is when it's integrated, because the truly wise person will bring it into behavior. And we have this challenge all the time. Our ideologies and our beliefs and ideals are always greater than our actions. As in direct proportion to how the ratio gets smaller is the fusion that you create in your life. And this isn't just about being a good person, it's about you. It's about creating unity and integration in your own life. Inconsistencies within a person's life are a real disease. What I mean by that is they eat away at a person. It's like a lie that you tell. So you can become a professional liar, where you lose your conscience and it comes easily. But every lie begins to eat away at a person, because you have to constantly work and be vigilant to make sure you cover up on the lie. So every lie needs other lies. Then you have to remember what lies you told as the years roll on. And then you become brilliant at covering all your tracks. And there's always a back door out. So yes, a person like that is a great maneuverer. That's great. But what is it really doing to your spirit? It's taking a big part of your hard drive and focusing it on just simply inconsistencies. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. So our psyches are very splintered in that sense. A way to the remedy, the repair, the beginning of the cure, of the healing, in the Sinai sense of it, is an action that's consistent with an ideal. So it comes down to simple things, actually. Simple acts of virtue and kindness that we do are not just about doing the right thing and helping others, it's about creating a unity within yourself. The fact is, as they say, when a person is selfish and serves their own needs, it feels good for the moment, but in the long term doesn't feel so great. When a person does something for another, at the moment it's not so comfortable, but in the long term it always feels good. So if someone asks you to wake up tomorrow early in the morning to go volunteer and help somebody, so for the moment it's not going to be so comfortable. Who wants to roll out of bed, especially if it's cold and all that? But at the end of the day, you're not going to regret it. Whereas the other way around, you stay in bed, so the moment you stay comfortable, but if you're a person with conscience, it will nag at you, maybe they needed me, stuff like that. I'm not talking about guilt, I'm just talking about what's right. I mean, I'm using simple examples just to demonstrate that the fragmentation goes on all the time in our lives. And remember, you're either becoming more integrated or more fragmented. There's no middle ground. You don't stay the same way. So it's about really understanding that our lives are driven by higher purpose and mission, which is really an integrating and unifying force. It's about connecting, fusing the material and the spiritual in our own lives. Which is why there's so much focus on the physical mitzvah in Judaism. At Sinai, you'd think such a profound mystical experience of synesthesia and a unification of a person's all their senses, you'd think is not a very physical thing, it's a very spiritual thing. And yet the Ten Commandments are all about simple things. Don't steal, don't kill. It seems like almost two extremes. You're going into such a spiritual high place, why are you talking about these simple matters? Because the ultimate challenge is not to get to a mystical place or become inspired. It's can you come back and live in this selfish, narcissistic world and live by those standards. That's the challenge. That's the challenge. Which means it comes down to our individual choices. Yes, there are mitzvahs that are connected to the heart and to the mind, but the bulk of them are connected to actions. When someone says, what's wrong with being a good Jew at heart? Well, it's the equivalent of you going and making a presentation to a businessman, to a venture capitalist, and the venture capitalist looks and nods and says, beautiful, it's great, my heart is with you, my mind is with you, my soul is with you. But they don't sign the bottom line. They don't sign the dotted line, which is give you a check, invest. So sometimes you go away feeling, oh, wow, he's definitely going to sign a check. He said it's so great, and then you never get anything. So all that so-called being with you, it doesn't matter. In this material world, there's only one thing that matters. It's the money that you need. So Sinai, in its esoteric and abstract experience, is understood also as the bottom line. If you don't transform this material world, all these mystical experiences ultimately are I can't say worthless, but they're close to that. They haven't affected or transformed anything. So it comes down to how we eat and how we sleep and how we do the small little activities. I know it's not as dramatic as we'd like to hear. We like to think of, oh wow, such experiences should happen in some very dramatic way. But the greatest experiences in life are the things that happen that are very non-dramatic, small little things. Is the little details that nobody's watching and that seem so trivial, but how you behave there changes everything. That doesn't take away from having times powerful, dramatic experiences. By all means. But if it cannot be integrated, cannot be spill over into the small details, there's a fundamental problem. You know, some people are great party animals. They go to parties, they seem to be on top of their game. Look at them when they're alone, when there's no one around, how they feel. Some of us don't even want to think about it, so we get addicted to parties and make sure we're never alone. You know? I know people tell me, I make sure I'm never home alone. I cannot stand being with myself. So we distract ourselves, and there are many, today we have many seductive and many powerful distractions. But you know, at the end of the day, we walk the streets of this earth, and we walk out of here this evening. Everyone has their own little lonely place, called existential loneliness. And it's not an easy thing to deal with when you focus on it. I remember mentioning it once at a Shabbaton, and someone afterwards, an elderly woman came to me, do me a favor, do not mention existential loneliness. It makes me cry. It reminds her of all those moments that we are so alone. So there are, if you look at the cumulative total, the details of our lives, as much as we may have people who love us, which also is a gift, we are alone in many ways, and there are aspects of our lives that only you are with yourself. And these little details that are not very, as I said, very pronounced, are where the real integration takes place. And that's why the ultimate unity described at Sinai was not one just of a powerful, I said, all-unifying experience. It was about bringing it down into little things, little gestures. The greatest people I've seen in my life, where I saw the greatness, was in small things, not in the big ones, where nobody was watching. The Torah says that when Moses was born, you know, the Pharaoh decreed that all male children, Jewish male children, should be killed and thrown into the river Nile, because his stargazers told him that the savior of the Jews would be a man. Didn't realize that the power is in the women, but that's what he thought. So he decided to kill them all. So Yocheved, the mother of Moses, innovatively came up with the idea of hiding the child in a basket in the river Nile. So the same river Nile that was being used to kill, that's the place she used to save her son. So the Bible tells us a small little story that she sent Miriam, who was the older sister of Moses, to watch and stand by the river at a distance to watch the child. And she would go there every day. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us this. Later we're told, because Miriam, for those minutes or whatever time she spent watching her little brother, who would become the great Moses, so later she was rewarded in great ways for this act. So you think about it, the early years of our lives. So we all were born into this earth. And I'll assume for a moment that we had healthy parents. We have healthy parents who the first moments that you entered into this world cradled you and held you close and told you that they loved you. These moments usually are not documented in, I'm sure there are movies that have scenes like that. But I mean to say, it's not something that you hear about a lot in the world of advertising or being pronounced. It's very quiet moments. How father or mother hold a child, diaper a child, feed the child, nurture the child. We have no recollection of those early years. But those moments are the ones that shape a person forever. So when Miriam was watching her little brother, the Torah makes a point. She didn't seem to be doing anything very, very powerful. All she did was stand there and watch the baby. It's like a babysitting. But that's what changes lives. How we were treated as children. And I hope for the best. We also, God forbid, we also know the other scenario when you're deprived of that type of nurturing. The impact is also unbelievably deep. I'm focusing on the positive, but the same idea is the same idea. It's the things that happen when people aren't watching. It's the things that happen when that seem so, as I said, trivial or detailed. But then when you look back accumulatively, those are the moments that shape everything, that change everything. All great experiences in life happen in those type of moments. You know, we like to read success stories today. We have literature, television shows, we read about heroes. And people's attention span is 7 seconds or whatever it is. They have to fit the whole story into half an hour. So we hear the whole story, but how often do you hear about the failures that led to that success? Very, 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 very rarely. And then when we see the success, we want to have it as well quickly. And I'm not saying we shouldn't and we don't deserve it. But the struggles of the human being are not really fully documented quite the same way. Especially in this fast food age, we are focused on the reward. And we want to get the reward quickly, especially when we see others did, or we think they did. So the Sinai experience, and interestingly, paradoxically, has both extremes. On one hand, it's fundamental transformative in the sense of integrating and uniting all forces and all wisdom, getting to a point where there are no compartments. But then it goes to the other extreme. It goes into the ultimate world of compartments where things are very detailed, and says that's the place you have to now bring that higher unity and higher truth. So what is the power, and qualitatively, not quantitative, in a newborn child crying and a mother or father going and reaching to that child? What power? Can it ever be estimated? Can any one of us document what happens in that child's psyche when that child, he or she, cries out and someone's there for that child? Obviously, the converse is also true when someone's not there. As I said, I'm focusing on the positive. There's no way we can ever estimate the power of that because we don't know all the forces at work when a person who's in need, very young, feels that somebody's there for them. That may shape and change something later in our lives, that when we are in difficult situations, we have a certain hope. We know that there'll be some salvation. And God forbid, if you do not have such nurturing, you feel hopelessness. It's always a direct impact of, as I said, moments, experiences that are very hard to document because nobody was there to talk about it. So the Sinai experience is about taking our smallest details of our lives. And that could be tomorrow morning, or tonight, how you speak to somebody that's a stranger, how you say thank you to a cab driver. It could be things that are the most, almost completely trivial, but they're not at all because they're part of life. And one word, one gesture can change reality. So that's the ultimate the paradox. On one hand, it's as high as it gets. On the other hand, it goes as low as it gets. And it's about bringing them together. On many systems, you'll find profound philosophies, very, very meaningful, intimate, spiritual, mystical experiences. But to bring it back to the details is very rare because generally, when a person is more spiritual and mystical, you tend to remain more in a vision and more of the big picture level. To take a big picture, and that should inform the small picture, is not a common thing. It takes real work. Because when you're in that type of place, it's like you're lifted to such a great place, it's not easy to focus on details. So Sinai focus on details because that's where transformation takes place. And in essence, this is why it had such a powerful impact. At the time, maybe not everyone knew it. Moses, for sure, did. And those that appreciated it did. But you see it in retrospect. The Bible remains the biggest bestseller. Beyond all the charts, they don't even count it on the New York Times bestsellers. Why is another story. Does everyone reading Bible understand necessarily or appreciate the whole spirituality of it? I don't know, but the bottom line, it has some type of captivates human imagination. And as I said earlier, on a more practical level, the Sinai principles have shaped essentially most of the world today in its ethical standards. Doesn't mean everything comes directly from there, but its principles were stated and became very much part of the fabric of our society. And that's not just because it was profound, it was because it was integrated. And it was ultimately detail-oriented, that gave a blueprint how to build a life. The reason we could sit here, and I speak now as a Jew, now, I was discussing things universally, which I think is relevant to everybody, but even what I'm going to say now as well, but I speak as a Jew for this reason, because the reason we could sit here and talk about people that lived, like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Pharaoh even, people that lived thousands of years ago. It's not just because we have a document that told us the story. Where are all the Roman descendants and the Egyptian descendants? And what about the Persian and the Babylonian and the Assyrian? And the list goes on and on. Where are their descendants? We're the great-grandchildren of Aristotle. He was a great thinker. But he was lacking one thing. He did not provide a system for his children and his grandchildren to live by. That's simple as that. So he left ideas. Maybe at the expense of his family. I don't even know if he had a family, to be honest. We could check that out. Circa committee. We'll check that out. But regardless, in Judaism you find when Abraham embraces God in the most profound way, then he says, L'man asher yitzaveh, that my connection with God is now that I will forever teach my children and grandchildren this path. And you think a mystical, a spiritual person, usually children and grandchildren are the last thing on their mind because they're busy on they're not domestic. They're very, in a very lofty place. So how do you bring that down to earth? That is the ultimate humility, that you don't get trapped in your own arrogant spiritual narcissism, let's put it that way. And then you bring it back to the details. So what it means for each of us in our lives, we've got plenty of these details. I'm not suggesting taking them all. Take a few of them and look at them. Just being aware, you will see you will become automatically a little more conscious and therefore a little more refined. And when you do that, you create fusion. It may be small in quantity, but in quality, it can be the difference between life and death, really. So the Sinai experience of integrating matter and spirit is really essentially something that is a choice we make all the time. And it's those choices that change everything for us and for the people around us. I see it in my own day-to-day activities and work. Just share with you a story that captures this. It happened a few years ago. And that is, I was teaching then at 81st Street on the Upper West Side. And I was discussing unconditional love. I was talking about unconditional love. That conditional love is dependent on a condition, so when the condition isn't there, the love also is affected direct proportion. And while I was speaking, there was a fellow sitting to my right, I remember, and he began to mumble something. And he started getting louder and louder. And then when we could hear what he was saying, got so caught up in what I was teaching about the unconditional love, he says, yeah, unconditional love. The only unconditional love is the love you get from your dog. As humans, you can never trust. There's always some agenda. There's some strings attached. Unconditional love, you come home, no matter what kind of mood you are, anything. Your dog jumps all over you, licks you, kisses you, and you feel loved unconditionally. And as he was going on, I got quiet because he was carrying on. And I remember a woman on the other side of the room looked at him and said, "Can you shut up? You know? We're here to hear Rabbi Jacobson." And I remember he gave her this deep look. He squinted his eyes and he said to her, "You're so shallow," you know? Which was an interesting way of putting it. And everybody was looking at me, what am I going to do? Because he was like he was very caught up with it, literally frothing at the mouth about this unconditional canine love. And if you're an entertainer, it's a great opportunity to use him as a mascot and like a parody. So what I said to him, tonight we're discussing human love. We'll focus another class on canine love. So he said, okay, I understand. And he calmed down, and I went back to my class. After the class, someone came over to me and gave me a note in an envelope, which I didn't read at the time. I took it home with me. When I got home, I opened the envelope, and she says, I've been coming to your class for the last 3 years, pretty much consistently, and I've learned many, many things that have changed my life. But tonight, I learned more than anything that you've ever taught. How you treated him. You could have easily, everyone saw that he was a little off. You could have easily, like, not dismissed him, but, made a little fun. And instead you treated him with such dignity that made for me more impact than everything you've ever taught. Not to take away from what you taught she had. And what she wrote to me made more impact on me than I made, I guess, on her. So we're all complimenting, flattering each other. Okay. The point I'm making is I'm not saying it so much about myself. I see, and I didn't mean much. I mean, there's a story behind the story, which is not for now. But I just, I understood, not that I had the necessary pity, but I knew there must be something deeper going on in his life. I've had some experience. And you never know where a person's coming from when they speak like that, about love and unconditional love. I didn't know his life, and I wasn't aware of his story, and I still don't know. But I knew enough to just know how to respond. And that little thing, which was like not even my class, it happened spontaneously. It wasn't planned, had such impact. And I can tell you hundreds of such stories. They happen all the time. That's where you see real integration. And trust me, I'm far from perfect. I cannot tell you I've always did it right. This story I tell is an example. But I'm saying it's an example for all of us. There are things that are not necessarily like Maimonides writes. It's not the wisdom, it's not even the teaching. I can tell you years ago when I was giving my class at home, years ago, I know no question in my mind that sometimes the smell of chicken soup on a Thursday night in the kitchen had more impact on people than everything I taught. And which is why sometimes the food at a kiddush is more important than everything else, so to speak. So it's sometimes the incidentals or the side things, the things that you don't even think are really happening, how you serve, how you speak, not when you're speaking, but like when it's informal, when it's not prepared. These are the places where the divine manifests in the most profound ways. So my suggestion is that in a week like this, it's a good opportunity to recreate a Sinai experience in your details. Find some of them. And it's mostly about awareness. It's not like we're unable to do this. It's awareness. I don't know how you treat waiters in restaurants, but it's interesting to me when people are really obnoxious to waiters. It's also interesting when waiters are obnoxious to the people. It's another story. But it's interesting, sometimes you think, well, you're entitled. I feel sometimes bad for waiters, like, why does this guy have to be serving me? But then it's a good test laboratory for our sense of entitlement of who's supposed to be serving whom, and people's lives. In general, this whole distinction of classes, are we truly one and unified? I'm not suggesting you suddenly have to get up and tell the waiter, hey, listen, have my meal, I'll serve you. Maybe sometimes that would also be an interesting exercise. But you get what I'm saying. It's about being sensitive in the times that we often don't think about so much. So, may everyone have a real Sinai week and bring a little transformation, fusion into your own personal life. And from my end, I will do what I can do. Meaningful Life Center, we're here every Wednesday. Next Wednesday will be another class. Tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his 7 o'clock class. And it's a great honor for me to spend time with you, as I hope it is for you as well. It's souls communing beyond the bodies. And hopefully we can each empower one another with a little strength as we go back into the hostile world around us, or whatever word you want to use for it, the cold, cruel world, cold, dark world. To bring a little light, that we strengthen each other, and it strengthens our souls to go out there and take on the day, seize the day. Not feel a victim or feel victimized or in any way a product of circumstances, but someone that shapes and can change circumstances. That would be, I think, the greatest gift that comes out of this evening. And I know I feel empowered sitting with you, and as I said, words from the heart enter the heart. So just as one heart is, just as our face is reflected in water, one heart is reflected in another. So I guess if I feel empowered, probably some of you do as well, and I just hope that's the case. And may we all pass on this strength to others, like a flame that lights another flame. Word of mouth. We're all links in a bigger chain, and this can have a perpetual ripple effect on all of the world, the butterfly effect. So, thank you very much.